President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris host the Tennessee lawmakers who helped 400 protesters storm the Tennessee Capitol. This was the same day that the Biden re-election campaign released footage of January 6th, saying that those are insurrectionists who are a threat to democracy. Sudan has descended into civil war, and RFK Jr. outlines how the DNC is rigging the primary. This is the noteworthy news that you need to know for today, Wednesday, April 26th, 2023. But first, be sure to subscribe to this channel by clicking the subscribe button down below, and also follow me at Julie R. Hartman on Instagram and Twitter. On to this first news story. You know, when I read something like this, it is so despicable, but unfortunately, it is not shocking. President Biden and our VP Kamala Harris has hosted 3 Tennessee lawmakers who helped to facilitate the storming of the Tennessee Capitol that happened earlier this month after that shooting at the Covenant School in Tennessee. So again, as background, on March 27, 2023, a transgender shooter, Audrey Hale, walked into the Covenant School, a K-6 elementary school in Nashville, and killed 3 9-year-olds and 3 adults. In the days afterwards, 400 protesters stormed the Tennessee state capitol protesting the state's gun laws. But 3 Democrat representatives, Reps Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, and Gloria Johnson, actually egged on these protesters who stormed the Capitol. 2 of them, Reps Jones and Pearson, actually used a bullhorn to rally the protesters and waved banners from the House's podium, encouraging them to storm the facility. Now, those 2 representatives were temporarily expelled from the Tennessee House of Representatives by Republican lawmakers who voted to expel them, though they were later reinstated just a few days afterwards. Now, there have been charges of racism because only 2 of those 3 reps were expelled. Justin Jones and Justin Pearson were the 2 who were expelled, whereas Gloria Johnson was not. And because those 2 individuals who were expelled are black men, and the woman that wasn't expelled is a white woman, people in the Democratic Party, even our Vice President Kamala Harris, has implied that this was racist. But according to the footage from that day, Jones and Pearson, the 2 black men representatives who were expelled, they were the ones that were at the forefront of trying to rally the protesters and get them to storm the building. So it makes sense that those were the 2 of the 3 that were voted to be expelled. Again, they were later reinstated. But President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris invited all 3 of them to the White House yesterday. They sat together in the Oval Office, posed for some media images, and they talked about banning assault weapons. But the greater conversation was actually about the expulsion itself. President Biden criticized these 2 individuals' expulsion as, quote, shocking, undemocratic, and without any precedent. He also claimed that they were standing up for, quote, democratic values. So I mentioned in the introduction that this was the same day, this happened yesterday, this was the same day that the Biden campaign for re-election in 2024 put out a video announcing Biden's intention to seek a second term as president. And of course, within the first minute of the video, President Biden shows footage of January 6th and uses that narrative in order to try to gather support among his constituents the same day that he's hosting people who helped others storm the Tennessee Capitol. Let's watch that Biden campaign video.
Freedom, personal freedom, is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
There's nothing more important, nothing more sacred.
That's been the work of my first term, to fight for our democracy.
This shouldn't be a red or blue issue.
To protect our rights, to make sure that everyone in this country is treated equally and that everyone is given a fair shot at making it.
Here it comes.
But you know, around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms, cutting Social Security that you paid for your entire life while cutting taxes for the very wealthy, dictating what health care decisions women can make, banning books, and telling people who they can love, all while making it more difficult for you to be able to vote.
Okay, we get it. Hey, Sean, Rick, do you guys have a barf bag? Do you have a trash can? I'm not kidding, I'm feeling sick. Within the first minute, he's showing, I mean, there's so much to analyze there, of course, but he's showing footage of January 6th. First of all, our Vice President Kamala Harris compared January 6th to Pearl Harbor and 9/11. She did that in a speech a few months ago. If you really believe that January 6th is a tragedy that stands alongside those days, why would you shamelessly use that footage in your re-election video? Can you imagine a re-election video with footage of 9/11? It is just in such poor taste. And of course, the shamelessness of them inviting these representatives who helped 400 protesters storm the Tennessee Capitol. They invite them to the White House and praise them at the same time that they release these video condemning the people on January 6th, who of course deserve to be condemned, those who violently breached the Capitol. But again, they are so shameless in their political favoritism, their corruption, and their hypocrisy. I have a show called Timeless, they have a show called Shameless, and it shows you the contempt that they have for the American people, that they feel that everyday Americans are so stupid and so unprincipled that they will fall for these lies and continue to vote for them and support the Biden-Harris regime. What's really sad about this is that the modern day Democratic Party, and this was not always true of Democrats or of those on the left writ large, but it is true today. The modern day left in Democratic Party does not hold that there are, for lack of a better term, timeless, eternal, unchanging standards of conduct that are true for everyone. Storming a Capitol is always bad. It doesn't matter if there are right-wing people doing it or left-wing people doing it. It doesn't matter if the reason for doing it is protesting election improprieties or protesting gun legislation. It is always, always eternally wrong to violently breach a Capitol. But according to the modern-day Democratic Party, actions are not judged by the action itself, but actions are judged by who is doing it. They are judged by the context surrounding it. So that's why they are supporting the Tennessee insurrectionists, if you can even call them that, whereas they are condemning the January 6th insurrectionists. By the way, I don't think that either are insurrectionists. The definition of insurrection is the intention to violently overthrow the government. In both of those cases, there may have been specific people who were insurrectionists, but the whole event in its entirety for both of those cases was not an insurrection. But I really want to harp on this theme because it's certainly true of this one instance of hypocrisy, but it really does extend to many of the positions taken by the left. This is why, for instance, the New York Times does not identify the race of an individual when it is a black man, for instance, killing a white man, or even a black man killing a black man. They only identify the race in cases of murder when it is a white person killing a black person, because to them, murder isn't eternally always wrong. It is only wrong when it is a white person who is killing a member of the intersectionality group. Another example, you see that the left talks all the time about protect women, protect black voices, and then you see them turn around and the same people who are saying protect women are the ones who are supporting undermining women's sports by having biological men compete in women's sports, and the same people who are saying protect black people are turning around and vociferously smearing the name of Clarence Thomas. It's because they don't have an unchanging eternal principle. They only use that principle, in quotation marks, as a talking point to achieve their political ends. They're only going to support women if those women who they are supporting is going to help them politically. They're not going to support women or black people or fill in the blank if it doesn't help them politically. When I approach an issue, I really try to look at it as what is the operating principle here, and that is not what the Democratic Party does. I'll give you two final examples, and they are especially relevant in the news cycle now. Anthony Fauci actually admitted to the New York Times that he lied publicly about the efficacy of the vaccine in order to impel more Americans to get the jab. And we also saw, as recently as Monday, that the 51 intelligence officials who signed that Hunter Biden laptop story saying that it was Russian disinformation were egged on by our Secretary of State. And one of those 51 intelligence officials, Douglas Wise, said that he and the other signees knew that the Hunter Biden laptop story in some part had to be true. Those are two examples of noble lies. Anthony Fauci lying because it will help him politically, and the 51 intelligence officers lying because it will help them politically. They don't view a lie as eternally bad. If it's a lie that helps their ends, then the lie is okay. Again, just really something that is important to highlight and see that it goes beyond hypocrisy. It is a fundamental lack of principles that our modern day left has in this country. Moving on to a story pertaining to international relations, I'm sure many of you have seen, at least on covers of newspapers or in the news, that Sudan has descended into conflict. And I want to give you a little bit of a background of what is going on here. So in 2011, Sudan and South Sudan, which was a part of Sudan but then became its own country, were engaged in a civil war. South Sudan is actually the newest country in the world as of today. And now we are seeing sort of a second civil war reignite in Sudan. It started just about a week ago. Nearly 500 people have been killed, 4,000 have been injured, tens of thousands of Sudanese have fled their homes, and millions are in jeopardy of not having food or water. Now, also as background, before this second civil war, if you will, happened starting about a week ago, about a third of Sudan's 45 million people suffered from hunger and food insecurity before this conflict. So it has only been exacerbated. So what is going on here? Well, there is a rivalry between two top generals in the country. One of them is the head of the Sudanese military, and another is a head of a militia group that is called the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. And so what's very interesting about this story, at least to me, is that these two generals, the head of the military and the head of the RSF, actually were friends. They joined forces back in 2019 in order to oust Sudan's dictator, Omar al-Bashir. 2 years later, in 2021, they joined forces again to topple a replacement civilian government that emerged after that first dictator was toppled. So after they joined forces, now they have become enemies. They have turned on each other. Now they are sort of rivaling one another in order to figure out who is going to control Sudan. Not just the military, but Sudan's very robust mining industry, their banking system, their educational system, etc. And so as I was reading this story, my mind went back to a Roman history course that I took in college and remembered that this exact thing happened in Rome 3,000 years ago. Julius Caesar was the ruler of Rome. I'm sure at the very least some of you recognize that name, and he was actually assassinated by Roman senators. In the wake of his assassination, there were these two men, one named Mark Antony and one named Octavian. And the two of them were sort of proteges of Julius Caesar. They were very loyal to him. And they joined forces together and started a civil war against the Roman senators who had assassinated Caesar. So Antony and Octavian, their coalition is fighting against the Roman senators. The Mark Antony Octavian coalition defeats the Roman senators, and then Mark Antony and Octavian turn and start fighting one another. That is exactly what is happening, maybe not exactly 3,000, probably more like 2,000 or 2,500 years later, where these two Sudanese generals joined forces in order to oust someone, and then they're turning on each other. It just shows you, again, I feel like I'm throwing out this word a lot, but it's the reason why I chose the name of my show. It shows you the timelessness of some elements of human nature. Yes, of course, circumstances change, but people don't change. We keep repeating and repeating and repeating, and it's just so interesting to me. We're seeing the same thing happen now as happened literally thousands of years ago. Now, the World Health Organization actually came out with a statement recently saying that there was, quote, a high risk of biological hazard at one of the laboratories in Sudan. The laboratory is called the Public Health Laboratory that has World Health Organization, which means U.S. funding. And one of the groups, it's not clear whether it was the military, the state military group or that Rapid Support Forces militia group, but one of them seized control of this lab, possibly creating a high risk, as the World Health Organization is saying, of a biological hazard. Now, what's also important to note about this story is the way that other big powers, namely American adversaries, are trying to co-opt this civil war in Sudan to serve their own interests. For instance, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are eyeing Sudan's Red Sea coast. We're going to put up a photo right now of Sudan. It is on the east side of Africa, and it has, alongside Egypt, it borders the Red Sea. And so both the UAE and Saudi Arabia, because they're both across from Sudan via that Red Sea, are trying to control shipping and trade. And so both of those powers have tried to invest millions of dollars in Sudan in order to sway whichever side they support to win so that they can control the Sudanese economy. Another power, unsurprisingly, that is trying to come in here and co-opt this tragedy for their own benefit is Russia. I have talked on this show about the Wagner paramilitary group. It is a Russian militia group that was founded in 2014 during Putin's invasion of Crimea. And that Russian group, the Wagner paramilitary group, is now in the continent of Africa in various countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, trying to control those countries' economy. And that's what they're trying to do here in Sudan. Well, actually, one of the biggest Russian companies, it's called, I'm probably going to butcher this name, forgive me, Yevgeny Prigozhin. It is one of the biggest Russian companies, and it actually has a very strong presence in Sudan. It carries out its gold mining. So Russia has a very big incentive in order to see their side. They support the militia group, the RSF. They support that group in trying to overthrow the military general. So it's just really fascinating that, people in America talk about the colonization of Africa. That was something that I heard so much in high school and in college about European powers. By the way, Americans never colonized Africa. That's really important to note. Certainly, American groups went into Africa, namely church groups, but the actual powers that colonized Africa were France, Belgium, Germany, etc. The United States never colonized Africa. But anyway, we hear about European colonization of Africa, and here, right before our very eyes, Africa is continuing to be colonized, but not by Europeans, by the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and China. On to our third news story and our final one of today. RFK Jr., who of course is the son of Robert F. Kennedy and the nephew of former President John F. Kennedy. He is running as a Democrat for president in 2024. He has come out and said that the DNC, the Democrat National Committee, is rigging the primary. So as background, I talked about RFK Jr. Earlier this week on this show, Julie noted, but he's running as a Democrat for the presidency in 2024. And though he is a Democrat in name, he actually seems to be more of a Republican in policy. He's actually the opposite of a rhino. He's a dino, Democrat in name only. He has come out and condemned the elitism that has plagued the Democratic Party. He has talked about government's weaponization of certain institutions, namely the FBI, against conservatives. And he has vociferously condemned the lockdowns of 2020, talking about the educational and economic catastrophes of those COVID lockdowns, in addition to the 37,000 excess deaths that it caused. Also, RFK Jr. has questioned our $113 billion commitment to the war in Ukraine. But he made another lèse-majesté. Lèse-majesté is this French term meaning sort of a rebuke of a monarch. He's made another lèse-majesté of the Democrat Party by saying that the DNC is rigging the primary. So as background, primaries are the various elections that are held in which certain candidates compete for the nomination. So obviously, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party choose one individual to be their nominee for president, but now there are all these people in the race on both sides trying to compete to be that nominee. So the primary is a way to sort through those individuals. So there are primaries that are held in different states, like almost all states, Iowa, North Carolina, New Hampshire, et cetera, et cetera. And what happens in those primaries is that people vote, and there isn't just one winner. There are many winners, and they're determined by percentage points. And so if you win by a certain percentage, you get a certain amount of delegates. And then at the end of the rainbow, they add up all the delegates, and whoever has the most delegates across the different primaries is the Democrat Party, in this case, is nominee for President of the United States. For the past 50 years, the Democratic Party has always held their first primary elections in Iowa and New Hampshire. There are various reasons why they've done that, namely that Iowa and New Hampshire are small states, and it allows outsider candidates to gain more influence because outsider candidates tend to have more strongholds in smaller states where the bigger population doesn't go for the obvious candidate. But what happened is that for this election, 2024, the Democrat National Committee voted for a new order. They are no longer going to have Iowa and New Hampshire be first for the primary. Now it is South Carolina. Well, why is this, you may wonder? It's what RFK Jr. is calling out. Biden in 2020 finished 4th in Iowa and 5th in New Hampshire. But he finished first in South Carolina because South Carolina has a big black population, which helped then candidate Biden defeat Bernie Sanders. So what the Democrat National Committee is doing is they're moving South Carolina to be first because they know that President Biden did well in the last primary season in South Carolina, and they're kicking back Iowa and New Hampshire, the other primaries where Biden didn't do so well. So the Democrat National Committee is trying to grease the wheels so that Biden is the nominee. And this is coming at the expense of other candidates such as RFK Jr. So in other words, the Democrat National Committee isn't letting the voters be the primary deciders. They're trying to rearrange the equipment here in order to create what they view as the best possible outcome. The reason why it's important to have South Carolina be first, according to the DNC, to have Biden win, is because if you win in the first primary, it gives you a lot of momentum for subsequent primaries. So if President Biden gets a huge turnout in South Carolina, he wins by a landslide compared to other candidates, he's going to get more media attention. He's going to get more money and donations, and he is going to create the perception among American voters that he is the desired candidate. So the momentum of that first primary is really important, which is why the DNC is putting South Carolina first to grease the wheels for Biden. And RFK Jr. very aptly pointed out that it's amazing that they're doing this because they're changing the standard that has been in place for 50 years. Also, RFK Jr. has condemned the fact that the DNC actually has no primary debate schedule on the calendar right now. And we think, oh, well, the election isn't until November of 2024. It's time right now to get your calendar in order to schedule these debates. You do not want to do this at the last minute. If the DNC were smart, and clearly they appear not to be, they would actually elevate RFK Jr. as a candidate. They wouldn't grease the wheels for Biden because RFK Jr. still has some of the good parts of what used to be classical liberalism, but he condemns the excesses and the corruption that has come to characterize the Democratic Party. So if they were smart, they would realize that in the eyes of voters, the Democrat Party has become the corrupt party of the elite. And so they would choose to elevate this guy, especially with the Kennedy family history. Thanks so much for listening today. Just a reminder to click the subscribe button below and follow me at Julie R. Hartman, and we'll see you soon. Take care.